The pilot flying this plane is about to terrify everyone. He's at the controls of Boeing's new state-of-the-art airliner. His destination is Lake Washington, where 250,000 people have gathered for the 1955 Gold Cup. He's been instructed to perform a simple flyover for the crowds, but that's not what he's going to do. Instead, once in view, he's going to roll the plane until he's flying completely upside down. Airliners aren't designed to fly upside down, but this pilot has something to prove. Just 3 years earlier, the British put the first passengers on a jet.
The Comet jetliner, pioneering the first pure jet commercial airline service.
Except they had built it wrong. Within a year, they began breaking apart in midair. 3 catastrophic failures with no survivors. The aircraft were pulled from service, and not a single one of them would ever fly again. The world's first jet airliner was supposed to prove that jets were the future of air travel. Instead, it did the opposite. Engineers hadn't figured out how to make jet engines last, so they had to be torn apart and rebuilt every 6 weeks. A prop could fly for over a year before needing an overhaul, and they didn't know how to make them fly far enough. So to fly from Europe to the Middle East, it had to stop and refuel twice. A prop could fly non-stop and might even get there first, and they didn't know how to get it airborne without enormous runways. So on a hot day at some airports, pilots were bumping half the passengers off the flight just to get off the ground. And they didn't understand what pressurization would do to an airframe over time. So with every flight, it weakened until it failed catastrophically. Despite the fanfare, the first jet airliner wasn't ready. Jets had no business carrying passengers. And 3 years earlier, that's exactly what many in the crowds at Lake Washington believed. Bill Allen was among the 250,000 in attendance. As Boeing's president, he had problems of his own. When the Second World War ended, his company ground to a halt. Military contracts were canceled overnight, revenue evaporated, and thousands of workers were laid off. While his competitors were selling airliners by the hundreds, Boeing's entry, the Stratocruiser, was a failure. Its engines were the most complex piston radials ever built, 28 cylinders, hundreds of spark plugs, and a reputation for catching fire in flight. By 1950, nobody was buying Boeing airliners. They hadn't sold a plane in years. Bill Allen's company was being left behind. But Boeing had something no one else did. In the 1950s, they were building the world's greatest jet bombers. At over 600 miles per hour and a 40,000-foot ceiling, they were technical marvels.
In a B-47, you're flying the fastest and safest means of round-trip transportation from a forward base to any target in the world.
Boeing's engineers understood large jets better than anyone else, and what Allen understood was his engineers. They looked at the Comet and saw a concept that had been built wrong, and they were certain they could build it right. So in 1952, Allen made an enormous bet. He took nearly every dime Boeing had made since the war and pinned it on a single airplane, a new jet. To keep his competitors in the dark, he disguised the project as just another variant of an existing airplane. And to hedge his bet, he hoped to sell it to both airlines and the Air Force. The problem was, by 1954, Allen's bet had gone bad. The public had just watched jets fall out of the sky, and no airline in the world wanted anything to do with them. So Allen and his engineers would need to get it right and somehow convince a world that had already made up its mind. When designing the Comet, the British asked, how do you prevent a failure? But Boeing's engineers asked, how do you survive one? And that difference would decide everything. Because Boeing would design a plane that could break and keep flying. And they started with the engines. The British buried them inside the wing roots. It was aerodynamically beautiful. But Boeing's engineers asked, what happens when an engine explodes? So they hung each engine below the wing on a pylon and attached them with fuse pins, structural bolts designed to shear. If an engine tore itself apart, the pylon would break free and the airplane would keep flying. Then there was the fuselage. Every jet at altitude is a pressure vessel. At cruise, the cabin inflates and the fuselage pushes outwards against the atmosphere. Back on the ground, it deflates. Every flight is another cycle, and metal, cycled thousands of times, eventually fails. The British knew this and tried to build a structure strong enough to resist it. But Boeing's engineers asked, what happens if it cracks anyway? So they spec'd thicker fuselage skin and structures to distribute stress forces. Then they went a step further, reinforcing the fuselage to contain a crack before it became a problem. And they didn't stop there. They used a civilian version of an engine already powering their bombers, proven across thousands of military aircraft, with more flight hours than any jet engine in the world. And they paired it with a 35-degree swept wing for high-speed performance, thrust reversers to land on shorter runways, and noise suppressors to operate from more airports. Boeing's engineers had an answer for every problem the British had exposed. Now they just had to prove it. On July 15, 1954, the Dash 80 lifted off on its maiden flight. But Allen had every reason to worry. He had bet nearly all of Boeing's post-war profits on a plane that nobody wanted. The airlines didn't just doubt Boeing's jet, they doubted the concept of jet travel itself. And Allen was running out of time, so he went on the offensive. He had his engineers build a pressurized fuselage, like the Comets, and then had them pierce it with metal blades. It disintegrated. Then they did the same to one of their own fuselage sections. It held. But this wasn't a test. It was a sales pitch. Boeing filmed the results and sent them to airline execs and anyone else who had the power to say yes or no to jet travel. But airlines showed little interest. Allen would need more than a film. And in August 1955, he spotted an opportunity. The Institute of Aeronautical Sciences was hosting a major conference in Seattle. Every major airline exec in the world would be in town. On the agenda were technical affairs relating to the future of air travel. But outside the boardrooms, Seattle was also hosting the largest single-day sporting event in the world, the 1955 Gold Cup. So Allen invited the executives onto a yacht to watch. And while they were there, he'd have his Dash 80 perform a flyover. But Boeing's chief test pilot, Tex Johnston, had other ideas. He knew a simple flyover wasn't going to sell any jets. So what he would do next would make the world's most advanced airliner look like it was out of control, risking Boeing's jet program, its reputation, and possibly the future of commercial jet travel. He pushed the Dash 80 into a barrel roll, 360 degrees, in front of 250,000 people. Down on the yacht, the execs stood in silence. Bill Allen thought he was about to watch his company disintegrate into Lake Washington. Then he came around and did it again. But Tex Johnston hadn't lost his mind. He knew that Boeing's engineers had tested and validated every last rivet of the airplane. He also knew what the execs on the ground didn't. A barrel roll is a 1G maneuver. The aircraft follows a corkscrew path and experiences about the same force as straight and level flight. Airline executives who had been afraid to put passengers on a jet had just watched one fly upside down. Just days later, the phone rang in Bill Allen's office, and it wasn't good news. The first U.S. airline had just announced they were ordering jets, but they weren't buying from Boeing. Douglas, the king of the airliner business, had quietly watched Boeing's proof of concept and announced almost the exact same airplane. They called it the DC-8, and the first order opened the floodgates. By the end of October 1955, they had already sold more than 60. Boeing was humiliated. They had spent 3 years risking everything to build a prototype, test it, and prove that it worked. And now Douglas was beating them with a drawing and a sales pitch. Douglas had been building airliners for decades. They ridiculed Boeing for not having a clue. They didn't need a prototype. They promised the airlines better range and more seats. Boeing's jet offered 5 across. Douglas promised 6. The airlines did the math. 1 extra seat per row meant millions in extra profit. And so United, Delta, and Eastern Airlines all committed entirely to the DC-8. Bill Allen was out of time. Boeing would lose the jet age before it even started. So Allen made a costly decision. He sent his engineers back to the drawing board. He scrapped his plan to share tooling between the military tanker and civilian versions of his jet. Instead, he listened to the airlines. Boeing would have to widen the fuselage and redesign the wing. They'd have to spend millions they didn't have to start over. But Boeing still had an advantage. They had nearly a decade of real-world testing, aerodynamic data, and pilot hours. When it came to jets, they were still miles ahead. And on October 26, 1958, the 707 entered service, nearly a year before the DC-8. It was a smash hit. Passengers were mesmerized by the speed, the quiet cabin, and the glamour of the jet age. And airlines that had ordered the DC-8 couldn't afford to wait around while Douglas was still finishing their plane. Within months, they began switching their orders. Soon, the 707 was outselling the DC-8 2-1. But Douglas, the most powerful aircraft builder in the world, wasn't going to take it lying down. For the next half-century, the two titans traded blows. Boeing raced to introduce the 727 and 737. Douglas countered with the DC-9. Boeing built the legendary 747. Douglas answered with the DC-10. But then, something changed inside Douglas. The engineers who had built some of the greatest airliners ever made were slowly pushed aside, and it came with deadly consequences.
The floor of the Turkish Airlines DC-10 collapsed.
What happened then is a thing that nightmares are made of.
Right, American 191 Heavy, you want to come back into what runway?
Behind closed doors, a deep systemic rot had taken hold. Decades later, the same philosophy that destroyed Douglas would find its way inside Boeing. In episode 2 of Unsealed, I trace the tragic half-century collision of Douglas and Boeing, told through deep research, rare archival footage, and cinematics. A story of intense competition, complacency, and the descent of two aviation titans. And you can watch it right now on Nebula. Nebula is where you can watch hours of exclusive Mustard videos you won't find anywhere else, and my most ambitious projects ever, like my latest feature on Operation Bolo, which uncovers one of the most incredible combat operations of the Vietnam War, where F-4 Phantom pilots turned the air war on its head by dragging North Vietnam's elite MiG-21s into a deadly ambush. You might know the history, but you've probably never seen the battle like this. On Nebula, I'm able to go beyond what's possible on YouTube, with longer runtimes, deeper dives, and the freedom to build something truly cinematic without compromise. And it's where I explore captivating stories behind engineering marvels, iconic machines, and groundbreaking ideas that were supposed to reshape the future. On Nebula, there are no advertisements or sponsor messages, and it's where your favorite creators release early and exclusive content. When you sign up, you're not just getting more videos, you're directly funding the kind of ambitious, high-effort projects that otherwise could never have been made. Whether it's Real Engineering's Battle of Britain series, Neo's Underexposure, or Real Life Lore's Mad Kings. If you sign up using the link below, or scan the QR code on screen, or go to go.nebula.tv/mustard, you'll get 50% off an annual subscription, so you can enjoy Nebula for just $2.50 a month.